It was supposed to be a peaceful Saturday morning. The kind of day you look forward to when the leaves begin to turn and the crisp scent of autumn floats through the air. I had just arrived at our cherished lake cabin to prepare it for my son's return from Afghanistan. Jake, my only son, had been deployed for nearly a year. This place wasn't just a cabin, it was a sanctuary. A decade's worth of overtime shifts and self-denial had gone into buying it. Every board of wood, every picture on the wall, every vintage piece of furniture told a story of sacrifice, love, and waiting. I wanted his homecoming to be perfect. I had even picked up a worn leather couch, the kind he used to sink into as a teenager during long family weekends by the water. I was adjusting it to face the panoramic view of Crystal Lake when it all began. I didn't hear her at first. The click of heels on the wood porch was drowned out by my thoughts of Jake and how good it would be to finally sit together again in silence, with the lake stretching out before us. Then came the voice. Crisp. Cold. Pristine. "Hello, Marcus," she said, her tone sugary sweet but hollow. I turned to find Victoria, our HOA president, dressed in an immaculate white suit with a clipboard clutched like a badge of authority. Her eyes weren't on me. No, they darted around the room, scanning, calculating, appraising. The way she looked at my family's cabin wasn't neighborly. It was predatory, like she was casing the place for something. Beautiful cabin. This view must be worth a lot of money. She paused on those last few words, as if testing how they'd land, and something deep in my gut told me I was in trouble. I tried to stay polite. "Thank you, Victoria. I've worked hard to make it a comfortable place for my son. He's due home from Afghanistan soon." Her demeanor changed with a snap. The smile faded into a frown. The warmth vanished like a light switch flipped off. "Oh, so it's empty most of the time? What a waste of such a beautiful place." My jaw clenched. Was she really calling our son's healing space a waste? I managed to respond, tight-lipped. "He's been serving overseas. I'm just getting the place ready for him to rest." But Victoria had already made up her mind. "You can't just move furniture without notifying the HOA," she said, as if I had vandalized community property. I stared at her, dumbfounded. I wasn't a stranger. I'd owned that cabin for 10 years. I'd paid dues, attended meetings, helped neighbors fix their docks. Now I was being treated like an intruder in my own home. That's when it escalated in a way I never expected. The next morning, I woke up to an HOA email with an ominous subject line. "Cabin rule violation. Mandatory meeting tonight." My stomach sank. My only crime had been placing furniture in my cabin. I reread the message over and over, hoping there was some mistake. It was filled with legal jargon, threats of penalties, and a summons to the community center. I called Ruth, my neighbor and longtime friend, hoping she got the same notice. "Marcus, no one's ever had a mandatory meeting over furniture," she said, the concern in her voice mirroring my own confusion. But the letter was real. And so I put on a collared shirt, tucked in my pride, and walked into that meeting with the hope that this was all a misunderstanding. What I walked into wasn't a meeting. It was a setup. The community center had been transformed into something out of a corporate boardroom. Victoria sat at the head of the table, flanked by board members who wouldn't even look me in the eye. Behind her was a poster, Lakeside Community Upgrades. It had glossy images of cabins, modern, sterile, soulless. Cabins that looked more like real estate listings than homes. "Marcus," she began, her voice cold and performative, "your cabin is not living up to its potential." I stared at her, heart pounding. "What are you talking about?" She clicked her remote, and the poster behind her changed to a photo of my cabin, my porch, my furniture, Jake's fishing gear. "Your son is away most of the time. The property is underused. We believe it could serve the community better." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. "You want my cabin?" I said, incredulous. Victoria didn't even deny it. "I want what's best for everyone." She looked around the room like a queen addressing her court. People would appreciate that view every day. Her tone was calm, detached, clinical. As if my family's blood, sweat, and sacrifices were irrelevant next to her vision of some luxury retreat. Then came the kicker. The board voted 6-1 to fine me $1,000 and suspend my use of the cabin for 60 days. 60 days. Jake's entire homecoming. She'd planned this with surgical precision, to ruin the only time my son could rest. To make sure his sanctuary was just a memory. I left that meeting shaking, hollowed out, the paper in my hand feeling like a death sentence. And then the unimaginable. The next day, as I continued preparing for Jake's arrival, refusing to let them steal our peace, I heard the sound of multiple footsteps again. But this time, it wasn't Victoria alone. It was her, flanked by two men in tailored suits. They looked like they belonged on Wall Street, not a lakeside community. "Marcus," she said, her voice now void of any neighborly pretense, "you've broken your suspension. These men represent legal counsel. We can help you avoid more trouble." One of them stepped forward with a practiced smile. "We're here to offer a reasonable cash price for the cabin," he said. Reasonable. Like throwing loose change at a family's lifeline. "I'm not selling," I said, fists clenched. Victoria's face darkened. "There are many ways to convince you." And just like that, they walked away, leaving me standing on my own porch, in my own home, feeling like prey. But I wasn't about to roll over. That night, I sat in Jake's favorite chair and reread one of his letters. It said, "Dad, I miss the cabin. When I'm scared, I close my eyes and picture the lake. It keeps me grounded." That's when I decided I wouldn't let Victoria take that from him. Not from me. Not from any family who built something with love. But Victoria wasn't done. That afternoon, 3 police cars pulled up to my cabin, sirens wailing, lights blazing. Officers emerged with hands near their weapons. I stepped outside holding one of Jake's letters, trying to remain calm. "This is my home," I said. "I have the papers to prove it." But standing across the property line was Victoria, speaking to an officer like a concerned citizen reporting a crime. "I told you," she said, voice trembling with fake worry. "He's unstable." The officer approached me cautiously. "Sir, we received a report of a possible break-in." "Break-in?" I showed them my ID, the deed, Jake's letter, everything. The officer looked around at the furniture, the military memorabilia, the porch with pictures of my son. "Sir," he said quietly, "this looks like a place where someone's coming home." They left after realizing they had been duped into responding to a property dispute masquerading as an emergency. But the damage was done. My neighbor saw the lights, saw me with my hands raised, saw the whispers start, and Victoria stood there, victorious, as the shadows of doubt planted roots around my home. Her plan wasn't just to steal the cabin, it was to destroy my reputation. By the time the sun had dipped below the lake, I was sitting in the quiet cabin with only the echo of sirens left in my ears. I thought about Jake, about the stories he told me from Afghanistan, about how hard he fought to make it back. And I thought, if he can survive that hell, I can fight this one. For him, for this cabin, for everything we built. What happened next would shock everyone, especially Victoria, because she thought she was dealing with just another passive homeowner. She didn't realize I was the father of a soldier. And soldiers don't just come home. They come home to win. I wish I could tell you that after the police left, the nightmare ended. But that would be a lie. In fact, the police showing up was just the beginning of Victoria's sick game. The very next day, an official-looking notice was taped to my cabin's door. A formal citation from the HOA, stacked with language so thick in legalese it could make a lawyer blush. I was now being fined for defying a suspension order and creating emotional disturbance in the community. The fine, another $2,000. That was on top of the $1,000 they'd already slammed me with. They were bleeding me dry, one absurd violation at a time. Victoria had found a way to weaponize bureaucracy, twisting community rules into a leash meant to choke the very soul out of our home. But I wasn't leaving. Not now. Not ever. My hands trembled as I read through the letter. Not from fear. No, I'd crossed fear days ago, but from sheer frustration. It felt like I was being slowly erased from my own property. Every step I took to prepare the cabin for Jake, every small gesture of fatherly love, was met with a bigger, uglier retaliation. First, it was the meetings, then the lawyers, then the police, and now this. I looked around the cabin, the photos of Jake fishing as a kid, the quilt his mother made, the new table I'd bought just so he could sit and eat while watching the sunrise, and I asked myself one bitter question. When did being a good father become a crime? That's when Ruth came storming through my front door like a woman on a mission. "Marcus, you need to see this," she said, out of breath. She dragged me outside and pointed to the edge of my property. My jaw dropped. Victoria wasn't just playing dirty anymore. She was moving in for the kill. Standing on the gravel path were 3 strangers. Well-dressed. Calculating eyes. One of them had a measuring device, another had a clipboard, and the third was taking photos from every conceivable angle. And there, standing tall and smug in the middle of them, was Victoria, smiling like she'd just closed a deal. I charged toward them, anger pulsing through every vein. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted. Victoria didn't even flinch. "Oh, Marcus," she said with that syrupy tone that now made my stomach turn. "Just showing a few friends around. They're very interested in lakefront property." My voice shook. "This cabin isn't for sale." One of the strangers didn't even look at me. "We'll pay in cash," he said, already jotting notes in a sleek black binder. The woman next to him, draped in pearls, spoke as if I were invisible. "Incredible view. We could do wonders with this place." And then Victoria twisted the knife. "After yesterday's incident with the police, well, I thought you might need help moving on." It hit me like a punch in the chest. She orchestrated the 911 call so she could use it as evidence that I was unstable. She humiliated me so she could sell my home at a discount. And now, she was shopping my son's sanctuary around like it was just another plot of land to flip. My cabin wasn't a business opportunity. It was where Jake took his first steps, where he caught his first fish, where we mourned his mother together after the cancer took her. And she wanted to paint it over and call it an investment. As I stood there, seething, Ruth slipped up beside me. "Marcus," she whispered. "That woman with the clipboard? She's from Lakeside Group. They've bought 3 cabins around here. And every single one of them had violations before they sold." My mind reeled. It wasn't random. It wasn't just Victoria being power-hungry. This was organized. Calculated. Ruth continued. "I think she's part of something bigger. Something planned." And that's when it all clicked. This wasn't about me at all. This was about control, profit, gentrification. And I was the last piece standing in their way. Later that night, as I nursed a lukewarm coffee and watched the sun set behind Crystal Lake, I spotted movement out the front window. At first I thought it was a neighbor, or maybe someone walking their dog. But when I opened the door, my heart nearly exploded. Someone had planted a for sale sign in my front yard. Professionally printed. Metal stakes. Bright, bold lettering. With Victoria's contact information at the bottom. I ran out, ripped the sign out of the ground, and stood there in my bare feet, furious and heartbroken. The next morning, the phone calls began. "Hey Marcus, I saw the sign. Are you really moving? Sorry to hear you're selling. Is the price negotiable?" The rumors spread like wildfire. In a small lakeside community, gossip travels faster than a powerboat. My reputation, carefully built over a decade of honest work, friendship, and family, was disintegrating before my eyes. And every step was being orchestrated by a woman who believed she was entitled to everything I'd ever worked for. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, another email hit my inbox. Emergency HOA meeting, cabin seizure discussion. Seizure. That word stole the breath from my lungs. The idea that Victoria and her cronies were preparing to take the cabin outright wasn't just outrageous. It was war. I forwarded the email to Ruth and immediately called her. "Marcus," she said, her voice shaking. "She's pushing you into a corner. She's daring you to fight back so she can crush you. That was her plan all along. Corner me, break me, and claim the cabin as collateral damage." And then I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I made a call to Afghanistan. It wasn't easy. International calls to a base like Jake's require paperwork, clearance, and sometimes divine intervention. It took 3 hours, 2 forms, and a lot of prayer. But finally, the connection clicked, and I heard my son's voice crackle through the line. "Dad? What's going on?" His voice was strained. He could always sense when something wasn't right. I told him everything. The meetings. The fines. The police. The sign. The seizure notice. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Jake spoke with a steel in his voice I hadn't heard since the day he enlisted. "Dad, that cabin is my home. I'll help any way I can." It was like someone poured resolve straight into my chest. That call gave me the strength to keep going. That night, I pulled out every document I had. The original HOA bylaws, the deed, photos of Jake in uniform, letters he'd written over the years. I built a case, my own war plan. This wasn't just about fighting back. It was about exposing the truth. I reached out to Ruth and asked her to record the upcoming meeting. "Whatever happens," I told her, "we're going to need proof." Ruth, bless her heart, didn't hesitate. "I've got your back, Marcus. And so will the others, once they know the truth." That sentence stuck with me. Because that's what I'd been robbed of, the truth. Victoria twisted everything. The community didn't know what was really happening. But soon they would. The night of the emergency meeting arrived, and I walked into that community center with my head high and my heart pounding. The room was packed, neighbors, board members, even some folks from nearby cabins who had heard the rumors. Victoria was already there, dressed like she was hosting a corporate shareholders meeting. Her laptop was hooked up to a projector. The screen behind her read, "Problem Cabin, Marcus Johnson." I took a deep breath and found my seat. Ruth gave me a nod from across the room. The lights dimmed, and the war began. Victoria clicked her remote. Slide after slide popped up. Photos of my cabin, shots of me moving furniture, satellite images that must have cost a fortune to obtain. 15 violations, she announced proudly. Over $5,000 in fines. Disruptions to community harmony. Property value depreciation. She said all this like she was reading out the charges at a sentencing. And then she delivered the dagger. This cabin is no longer aligned with the community's vision. We propose seizure or forced sale to a qualified buyer. I stood up. My heart thundered. My legs shook. But I spoke with a voice I didn't know I had. My son is coming home from Afghanistan in less than 2 weeks, I said. This cabin isn't a business asset. It's our home. Our healing space. Victoria rolled her eyes. Marcus, emotional manipulation won't. But I wasn't done. He's been sleeping on a cot in a desert. He's seen things no one should ever have to see. And all he's wanted, all I've wanted, is for him to have a place to breathe again. The board shifted uncomfortably. The room grew silent. Then Victoria smiled coldly. Then perhaps your son can testify to its importance. I met her eyes, unwavering. Funny you should say that. I opened my laptop, praying the signal would hold. The projector hummed quietly as I opened my laptop, and I could feel the tension thicken in the room like fog. The internet signal at the community center was spotty at best. A single bar flickered in the corner of the screen, taunting me as it tried to connect to a military base halfway across the globe. But this wasn't just a call. This was my lifeline, my one shot at saving everything Jake and I had built. This was no longer just about my son's cabin. It was about exposing a system of greed that had been festering in the shadows of our lakeside community. Victoria didn't know it yet, but the moment she suggested Jake should testify, she had lit the fuse to her own downfall. She leaned back smugly in her chair, her arms folded, watching me like a cat watching a trapped mouse. "Marcus, we don't have time for technical delays," she said, her voice icy and professional. This meeting was called to handle real estate issues, not family reunions. The other board members murmured their agreement, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to side with their queen or brace for the unexpected. But I stayed quiet. I just watched the progress bar crawl across my screen and willed it forward with every ounce of strength I had left. Then click. A green light. A faint crackle. The screen flickered and buzzed, and then there he was. Jake, my son, dressed in camouflage, sitting in a makeshift office lined with sandbags and military gear. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and you could hear the distant rumble of military vehicles. The contrast between his background and ours was staggering. On the screen was a war zone. In the room, a pristine community center decorated for real estate showings. The two worlds collided in that moment, and you could feel the room shift. Victoria froze. Her mouth parted slightly, her expression a mix of disbelief and dread. This wasn't what she expected. She'd banked on me showing up alone, tired, weak, defeated. Instead, she was now staring directly into the eyes of the young soldier whose sanctuary she had tried to steal. Jake looked straight at the screen, his voice calm and controlled. "My name is Jake Johnson. I'm currently serving in Afghanistan. And that cabin, it's the only thing that's kept me going some days." You could have heard a pin drop. Every head in the room turned. Even the board members who'd voted to find me looked shaken. "When I'm under stress after missions," he continued, "when the noise doesn't stop, I close my eyes and I imagine sitting on that porch, listening to the lake hit the rocks. That's my home." Victoria tried to interrupt, desperate to regain control. "Jake, with all due respect, this is a procedural meeting, and..." Jake cut her off. Calmly, decisively. "You called the police on my father. You had him surrounded by squad cars for moving a couch." The words echoed in the room like thunder. A few people gasped. Others looked away, ashamed. "You turned his love for me into a weapon. You tried to sell our memories to strangers." Victoria's face turned pale. I didn't know." "Yes, you did," Jake replied. You knew exactly what you were doing. You targeted a man who spent 10 years saving for that cabin. And you did it for money. His words sliced through every defense she tried to raise. They were undeniable. Undeniable because they came not from emotion, but from truth. And then, Jake leaned in closer to the camera. His voice softened. That cabin wasn't bought with a corporate checkbook. My dad worked double shifts as an engineer for years. We gave up vacations. He wore the same shoes until they had holes. Because he wanted me to have a place to come home to. And you tried to take it from us. Tears stung my eyes as I looked around the room. People were shifting, no longer just witnesses to an HOA meeting, but now witnesses to a reckoning. Victoria was unraveling. Her carefully crafted persona of order and professionalism was cracking under the weight of Jake's words. She tried one last desperate move. I was just following the rules. Protecting community values. Jake's eyes narrowed. What rules? He asked. The ones you made up to push families out, or the ones that only apply to cabins with the best view? The implication was clear, and so was the evidence. Victoria's scheme wasn't just about me. Ruth had been right all along. This was systemic. And just then, Ruth stood up, her phone in hand. I've been recording this entire meeting, she said loudly, her voice fierce and clear. Every word. Every admission. A ripple of murmurs passed through the room. Victoria looked like she'd been struck. You can't, that's illegal. No, Victoria, Ruth snapped back. What you've been doing is illegal. You've extorted people. You've weaponized the HOA. You've misused your position to run families out of their homes so your Lakeside Group friends could buy them cheap. The last of Victoria's allies shrank in their seats. They realized the ship was sinking and fast. Then came the final blow. Jake looked into the camera one last time, his voice breaking slightly. I'll be home in 10 days. And I plan to sit on that porch with my father. That cabin means everything to me. If it's gone, you'll answer to more than just community rules. You'll answer to every soldier who's ever dreamed of coming home. The screen went dark. And for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then chaos. People began talking over one another, some outraged, others ashamed. Victoria tried to regain control, but the power had shifted. The emperor had no clothes. One by one, community members stood and voiced their horror at what they had become part of. We didn't know. She tricked us. That poor kid. Finally, someone shouted, "Vote! Vote to remove her." And the room erupted in agreement. Victoria screamed something unintelligible. She threw her clipboard across the room like a child losing a board game, papers fluttering in the air like falling leaves. "This is MY community," she shrieked. "That cabin should be mine. It should have always been mine." It was her confession. Loud. Unfiltered. On record. The board took a vote. 30-0. Victoria was removed from her position, permanently banned from participating in community leadership. Ruth, steady as ever, was elected interim president. And one of her first acts was to tear up the proposed community seizure rules in front of the entire room. As for Victoria, she slumped into her chair, her expensive makeup streaked with tears, muttering to herself about lakeside views and missed opportunities. She wasn't a villain anymore. Just a sad woman whose thirst for power blinded her to the human cost. After the meeting, neighbors came up to me, some with hugs, others with quiet apologies. They spoke of regret, of shame, of realization. I nodded, thanked them, but I wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. I had a cabin to restore, and a son to welcome home. I walked home that night under the stars, the path familiar beneath my feet. When I stepped onto the porch and sat in Jake's chair, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: peace. The war, for now, was over. And in 10 days, the soldier would come home to victory. The days that followed that explosive HOA meeting were unlike anything I had experienced in my life. For the first time in weeks, my mornings at the cabin began without fear. No notices on the door. No strangers measuring the property. No lawyers with smug grins. The silence of the lake returned, broken only by the calls of birds and the whispering wind through the pines. But this silence was different now. It was peaceful, not ominous. The storm had passed, and in its wake, the truth had taken root, blooming faster than anyone expected. Victoria disappeared. Not literally, of course, people like her don't just vanish. But she might as well have. Her perfect image was shattered. Her power gone. The once feared HOA queen now hid behind drawn curtains, her car barely moving from the driveway. Whispers rippled through the community. about the recordings, the police call, the confession in front of 30 residents. Ruth had posted the full meeting video, unedited, raw, online. She didn't do it for revenge. She did it so no other family would face what Jake and I had. The video went viral. It spread like wildfire across veteran forums, homeowner groups, and even made its way into military support circles. The title read, HOA Karen calls 911 on military dad moving a couch. Soldier son calls in from Afghanistan. Thousands of comments flooded in within hours. People were outraged, moved, inspired. Some shared similar HOA horror stories. Others offered support. Donations were offered. News outlets reached out. It became more than a story. It became a symbol of standing your ground, a symbol of not letting bullies, no matter how polished or powerful, trample over what's sacred. A week later, Victoria's cabin was put on the market. No announcement, no farewell, just a cold, quiet listing with a suspiciously low price. Some said she was forced out. Others said she couldn't face the community. I didn't care. I didn't need to know the details. Her leaving was justice enough. And then, Jake came home. I'll never forget the moment I saw him walking up the gravel path to the cabin. Dressed in civvies, duffel bag over his shoulder, eyes scanning the porch with a deep longing. He looked older, tired, but there was something else, peace. The kind you only see in someone who's finally made it home. Dad, he said, dropping the bag and pulling me into the tightest hug of my life. You kept it just like I remembered. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, patting his back, feeling his strength and the weight he carried. I'd spent so long fighting for this cabin, I hadn't allowed myself to imagine what it would feel like to have him actually standing there. But there he was, flesh and blood. My son. We spent the whole evening on that porch. No phones, no noise, just us, watching the sun dip below Crystal Lake, casting golden reflections across the water. Jake sat in his old chair, the one I'd oiled just the week before, and let out a deep sigh. It's more beautiful than I remembered, he said softly. And I remembered it every day. I looked around and finally let myself feel proud. Not just for surviving the fight, but for protecting something real. Something that couldn't be measured in property values or HOA checklists. This cabin isn't just where we rest, I said. It's where we belong. A few minutes later, Ruth appeared, carrying a plate of her legendary chocolate chip cookies and wearing a grin so wide it rivaled the horizon. Jake, she called. Welcome home, soldier. He stood and hugged her like she was family, which, in a way, she was. The three of us sat there, passing cookies and stories like we'd been doing it our whole lives. Oh, and by the way, Ruth said, pulling out her phone with a laugh, you two have become famous. She showed us the video, now with over 5 million views, and scrolled through the comment section. There were thousands of them. Don't mess with a soldier's dad. Karen versus veteran family. Guess who wins? Plot twist of the year. Jake chuckled. Dad, you went viral? Apparently, I said, though I prefer quiet lakes over internet fame. Then he said something that made me pause. Maybe we should rent the cabin out sometimes, he suggested. Let other military families stay here. Call it a Karen-free zone. I stared at him, then burst out laughing. With one rule, I said. Rule number 1, welcome everyone. Rule number 2, no Karens allowed. We clinked our coffee mugs together and toasted to that idea. It was silly and simple, but meaningful. This cabin had become more than a home. It had become a symbol of what happens when people stand up, speak out, and protect what matters. The community changed too. With Victoria gone, new leadership was elected. Leadership that actually listened. Ruth was named the permanent HOA president, and her first official act was to create a military family protection policy. It ensured that no service member, or their family, would ever face what we did again. The community, once tight-lipped and fearful, became supportive and vibrant. Barbecues returned, porches filled with laughter. And most importantly, the fear lifted. That fear of being watched, judged, threatened was gone. In its place grew something powerful, solidarity. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down now reached out. A Vietnam vet from 3 cabins down came by with an old photo album. A young couple brought their newborn over to meet Jake. People who had voted against me came to apologize, not just with words, but with action. Some offered help with repairs. Others shared their own stories, how Victoria had tried to scare them too. One night, as Jake and I walked down to the dock, he turned to me. Dad, you know this was never just about the cabin, right? I do, I said. It was about not letting people erase us, not letting them pretend we don't belong. We stood in silence, the water lapping at the edge, moonlight dancing across its surface. And I realized then what made this place so powerful. It wasn't the view, or the structure, or the value. It was the memories, the sweat, the struggle, the healing. It was the soul we poured into it. Jake stayed for 2 weeks. We fished. We laughed. We grieved. We healed. When it was time for him to return to base, he left with a smile and a promise. I'll be back. And when I am, that porch better be waiting. It always will, I said. And it will. Because I will never let anyone, HOA president or not, take it from us again. So if you're watching this or hearing this now, wherever you are, let this be your reminder. Never underestimate the power of one voice. One letter. One father's love. Or one soldier's determination. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't yelling. It's standing tall. Sometimes the best revenge is telling the truth and letting the world hear it. And sometimes the best revenge is a soldier coming home to exactly the peace he dreamed of. Justice wasn't just served. It was carved into the wood of that porch, etched into every memory, and sealed with every sunrise we'll watch together again. Until then, the Karen-free zone will be waiting.